Since I was very young, I lived in a very peculiar house where, here in the city of Montevideo, a tragedy had occurred before we moved in, and it was always a paranormal place. I always say that I was lucky to have a mother who was very spiritual and who understood and supported us through the process. Objects moving, noises, seeing the presence of spirits. Mainly, I would see children running around the place or hear them. That was something we experienced daily. And as a child, I also suffered a lot from it because at that time, even though it felt normal, I didn't understand what was happening. And that led me to situations of fear, living with constant nightmares. Later on, as I got a little older, around 8 years old, I started to have other experiences, like losing a loved one who then began to manifest. And I think that's when I finally realized the reality of that communication with the spiritual world and with those who have already passed away.
There are people who have had experiences in life, experiences since childhood, that are difficult to explain from a rational perspective. Children who suddenly can see or perceive spirits or things that others can't perceive, things their friends can't see, or maybe even their family can't see either. And this isn't something easy to deal with when you're a child. This is the case with our guest today. He is Gustavo Modernell. He is Uruguayan and also a doctor. With him, we will talk about this topic and everything related to his experience as a medium. Gustavo, we warmly welcome you to this community.
Hello, Esteban. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here as well to share my experience with your followers and to be able to tell a little from my perspective what mediumship is and what it's like to live with it.
Gustavo, we understand that you have had mediumistic experiences, that you have perceived spirits for as long as you can remember, since a very young age. Tell us how it all began. What happened to you when you were a child? How did you experience it?
From a very young age, I lived in a very peculiar house here in the city of Montevideo, where a tragedy had occurred before we moved in, and it was always a paranormal place. I always say that I was lucky to have a mother who was very spiritual and who understood and supported us through the process. I say us because I also lived with my siblings and we all experienced things in that place on a daily basis, like objects moving, strange noises, and seeing the presence of spirits. I especially used to see children running around or hear them every night. When it was time to go to bed, my mother would take us up to our room and tell us not to go down to the living room, the dining room, or the kitchen. She never directly told us there was something paranormal, but she did tell us not to go downstairs. Since I was a child, beyond my own experiences, I've heard my mother talk with other people about what she went through or tell stories about going down to the living room at night and seeing a child there or hearing running footsteps. At first, there was even a step that led to the kitchen, and my mother thought it was the cat stepping on that step and making noise. Well, for a couple of nights, poor cat was left outside the house to see if that was really the cause, but the noises continued. I even remember waking up at night and hearing movement in the kitchen, hearing the clatter of dishes, the faucet running, and well, sometimes with a bit of fear, but also with some courage, I would go to that place and find everything spotless, silent, without any kind of noise. That was something we experienced every day. And as a child, I also suffered quite a lot from it because at that time, beyond having become used to it and not understanding what was happening, it led me to situations of fear, living with constant nightmares, even cases of presences that would appear to me even in broad daylight in the middle of a nap. I remember, for example, waking up at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and when looking towards my bedroom door, seeing a shadow as tall as the door itself, about 2 meters. And as I tried to hide or cover my head out of fear that it would come and touch my back as if to wake me up, or as if wanting me to see that presence. And when I looked again, that shadow was still there, as I said, in the middle of the afternoon. For me, it was something that, beyond being frightening, was a mix between fear and getting used to it, because as a medium, as a child, you see it as something normal for everyday life. In quotes, the child gets used to it, starts having imaginary friends who aren't so imaginary after all. I was also very emotional, because sometimes those spiritual influences can, as the word itself suggests, influence us and even manipulate our moods. And that was something that happened to me. I would sometimes act impulsively without thinking about the consequences. Yeah, and all that energy and movement left me caught between habit and fear, between uncertainty and being used to it. Well, that was also part of more of my childhood. Later on, as I got a little older, around 8 years old, I started to have other experiences, like losing a loved one who then began to manifest. And I think that's when I really became aware of the reality of that communication with the spiritual world and with those beings who have already passed on and are no longer with us in this plane, with us in a physical form. When that happened, it was the first time I lost a loved one, and it was also the first time I saw someone I had actually known physically, and then saw them after their passing in a spiritual form that was different from previous cases where I would always see these beings spiritually without ever having known them physically. That's why I want to emphasize this a bit, to point out that maybe that first loss was the first step toward understanding the experience I went through.
I understand. Of course, it's like a reaffirmation, and at that moment, the pieces of the puzzle kind of fit together for you. You realized, okay, what I'm perceiving is more or less related to this. Because at first, as a child, you don't have answers, you don't really explain things, you don't quite understand what's happening. Hey, Gustavo, and was it just you who experienced this, or did your siblings also have these kinds of experiences? Do your siblings also have some kind of psychic or mediumistic sensitivity?
Everyone in the house experienced these things. I think my siblings, I'm the youngest of all my siblings, and I think that because they were already living their own lives, working, studying, doing, in their daily lives, I think they were more focused on that than mainly on the spiritual things that were happening. It was like they had gotten used to it. They knew that there were some experiences, some noises in the place. I always remember and tell this story. One day, um, my brother and my sister were reading a book in the living room. They both ended up falling asleep on the couch. This was also during a nap. And then one of them was woken up by a slap, and the other's hair was messed up. They both woke up. One thought it had been the other. They started arguing until they realized that no, that like it hadn't been either of them. And in a way, they just got used to it. They could understand, well, yeah, it's something from the house, and they just went on with things. My mom turned to priests many times, to different religious beliefs, to see if they could cleanse the place, if they could get rid of whatever was there. But it was never resolved. Later, as an adult, already as a medium, and understanding how understanding, we never really finished learning completely, but trying to, well, to understand. mm, I realized that what was missing was a proper process for those spirits, so that we, the ones living there, could live in peace. I think it's people would come with other intentions to cleanse from a different perspective, and that's what never allowed it to work. But going back to your question, my mom was very religious. My mom had a direct connection with her father, who had already passed away. I never met her father, but she would always tell us things or warn us about things that were going to happen. In fact, my mother had the ability that at some point, if she was going through a tough financial situation, her father would tell her, play this number in the lottery in the pool. My mom would play and she would win. Um, it was really like that. She always kept us very much in mind. And if we were doing something as kids, acting up at school or doing something wrong, she would dream about her father and say, I dreamed about dad. He told me you're doing this, this, and this. We were amazed by that. I think my mother was a great medium in life, although maybe she never developed it. She never realized she had it because it was so natural for her that she never saw it as a skill. My siblings believed in this because they saw what happened every day, but they never focused on spirituality or maybe never gave it the importance that I did. I think that happened to me because I was a child, that I was more, my mind could be more attentive to these things. And since they were already adults, the worries of daily life kept them from paying as much attention.
So, from what I see, you inherited your mediumship from your mother. That's pretty clear, right? And did she have more of a dream related ability? Like her thing was communicating through dreams?
I feel like yes, or I feel like her contact with her father was very, very close, always through dreams. But she used to tell us a lot of stories. One day she told me that before her father passed away, when she was very young, this is the first time I'm sharing this. So for me, it's kind of an exclusive. Uh, she said that she saw death, and yes, she saw that death. The spear, it was like a spirit, like a skeleton that followed her everywhere. She said that if she went to the bedroom, she would see it there. If she looked under the bed, she would see it there. Just imagine, my mom would tell us this so naturally when we were kids. That's why I say, that we kind of got used to it like it was a habit. And she said that for several days, um, she saw that spirit, and then 15 days later, her father suddenly passed away. That's why I talk about that connection she had. This so much like that, and that experience she had lived through in telling it for her. Her conclusion was that it had been the spirit of death because she said that for many days it followed her everywhere, wherever she was. She even thought that maybe it was something that was going to happen to her. And well, it was a big surprise for her when her father suddenly passed away. She says that once he passed away, she never again saw that that spirit.
Yes, sometimes I think that there is a certain kind of information or a certain kind of connection that we unconsciously, according to our structure, our beliefs, can give a form to. It's not that death necessarily has to be like that figure. I don't know, right? Like spectral, but probably we ourselves give it that form in order to understand it on an unconscious level, obviously, but we give it that form. We could also give something the form of an angel if it has a different meaning for us, but it's not that we're making it up or imagining it. Rather, we're perceiving something. And unconsciously, according to our belief patterns, Irama, we give it a form, right?
Absolutely. I feel like I always mention this too. I think that what you're talking about is exactly what happens at the moment a person passes away, right? According to the beliefs that a person has, their religious beliefs, whether they believe in an angel or whatever it is they believe in, that being which is often said to come to meet us or help us at the moment of transition will appear according to what we believe, according to our faith. My mother used to say that she saw him just as we are seeing each other right now. And well, perhaps that belief, as you rightly say, made her subconscious manifest it in that way so that she could understand the message according to her own awareness of what was going to happen.
That's right. I completely agree. Gustavo, tell us a bit about that first experience you had when you went through the first death or loss of a close loved one, and how that made something click for you and you realized, okay, so I'm seeing someone who passed away, and now I understand my experiences as a child better. I can make the connection.
This person was someone who to me was like a father. He was the one who taught me how to walk, taught me how to ride a bike, and I was very fond of him. He lived next door to my house, not with us, but I would invite myself over to eat. Well, it was a father son kind of affection in a way. One day before my birthday, before I turned 8, and I really believe that nothing in life is a coincidence. That's why I mentioned these little details, you know. The day before my 8th birthday, he suddenly became unwell while he was watering the plants. He started feeling sick, was hospitalized, and 4 days later, he passed away. It was something very sudden for everyone, and for me, it was also very shocking because of my age, because I didn't understand what was happening. And I was left with that sense of something unfinished because my mom, since I was little, didn't want me to go see him while he was in the hospital those days, nor did she want me to go say goodbye after he had passed away because she thought it was better for me to remember him as he was in life. After that, I started dreaming about him and seeing him, but interestingly, in the dream, I would ask him, "But didn't you pass away?" And he would say to me, "No, don't worry, I'm going to stay a few more days and I'll be with you." After those dreams I had, I started seeing him even when I was awake. I would get home and see him standing at my front door, or I'd see him doing certain things, or even, well, where I had the most conversations with him was during dreams, you know? I think maybe the dream world is a more fluid way that allows us to make that connection. And that was the first experience I had with losing a loved one, with losing a person, because it was one thing to uh, see spirits that were already in a place or to see presences that were already there, but they weren't, people I had known in life. The only things I knew about death were the stories my mom told us about her father when he passed away, or about an aunt who had also died. And, well, that night she had knocked on the window to let her know she was gone. But I had never personally experienced losing someone I loved and suddenly not having them anymore, and so unexpectedly. For me, that marked a before and after in what I started to ask myself, you know, about life. I think in a way it was so unconscious or so normalized as well that I started to assimilate it as something natural, the naturalness of life after death, that it was something that kept happening, that continued beyond death itself, the contact with that spiritual world. So at 8 years old, I think there was a before and after in that belief or in that realization that I had the ability to contact those loved ones who, instead of scaring me, in that case, no, it was something positive for me. Go, oh, because I could keep having that connection with that person, and well, maybe I didn't feel the loss as much. You know why? Because I could have that connection. That was also just for a period of time. It's not like it lasted for many years. But I think that within that period, when I was 8, was when I had that contact. And then, well, I went on with my daily life. And of course, maybe it happened again or I dreamed about it. But mainly, I remember that year as the time when I felt that presence most strongly.
How did you see them? Did you see them the way you're seeing me right now? Did you see them just for a second, or did you see them for longer? What was the experience like with this loved one?
I always saw them just like I'm seeing you, but sometimes it was just for moments. I remember one time when I I came running and I saw him standing at the door of my house looking inside because he had this habit when he arrived. He was always there if the door was open because the house hadn't. You'd enter the house. There were two courtyards, and then there was the entrance. So he would arrive, and sometimes the door was ajar, and he would look in, peek inside to see if anyone was there, and it would happen that I'd arrive and see him, and then suddenly look again, and he was gone. Or I would have more communication through dreams. That was the part where I had the most conversations. But his presence always made itself known to me on different occasions, sometimes in flashes, sometimes for just a few seconds. or simply when I was doing something and I would feel that being right next to me.
In other words, perhaps the role he played at that moment, in aside from in quotes, consoling you over his departure or loss, also had to do with clarifying or shedding light on matters related to the spiritual world, with what goes beyond what the physical senses can perceive, right?
I think so. Maybe it was also a spiritual process for him because since he left so suddenly, perhaps he wanted to make sure that everything was all right or that the cycle could be completed because it happened to me again later on when my grandmother passed away. The same situation, but many years later, we're talking about 20 years later, the same situation where my grandmother dies in my house. And I have the same dream again where she tells me, I'm not going to leave, I'm going to stay 28 more days. In both cases, I was given that same number of days, and my grandmother also kept manifesting herself during that time. And I kept seeing her in my house during that period. That's why the particularity of both cases happening in exactly the same way really stands out to me. And that makes me think that maybe when I was a child, it happened so I could become aware of it, but then as an adult, it happened again. And I think maybe the reason has more to do with them than with me.
Wow, that's interesting. I was just about to ask you that because your first experience was when you were 8 years old with this loved one. And after that, how did your ability as a medium develop? And the other thing that catches my attention is this about the 28 days. Have you researched or studied why that coincidence happens, that both of them specifically told you 28 days and not 29 or 30 or 20?
I don't study numerology, but from the little I know, I imagine that from what I do know about numerology, 8 and 2 add up to 1, and that sum once again signifies the end of a cycle, and 1 represents a new beginning. Maybe for the spirit in certain cases, though I don't like to generalize, and I think each case is unique, but it's true that perhaps in some situations, the spirit needs to complete a cycle of a certain number of days in order to fully transcend or maybe detach from this world. I also understand that the 28-day cycle is like a lunar cycle where you have the new moon, waxing, full, and waning phases, which also completes a or cycle. It could be related to that. I can't say for sure what the real reason is, but but I've imagined that this might be the process. Regarding your other question, after I lost that loved one and that period had passed on day, I continued living day to day with paranormal situations that for me might have seemed normal. So I feel that from then until my teenage years, those experiences gradually became normalized, for me. And in my teenage years, something started to happen that wasn't so much about seeing spirits or deceased people anymore, but rather it became more about premonition, starting to see things that were going to happen, situations that would arise spontaneously, which seemed trivial at first. For example, I always remember one day really stuck with me. I was at school, there was a huge storm, and there were about 15 or 20 minutes left before we could leave. A classmate said, when we go outside, we're going to get soaked by the rain and out of nowhere. I told her, when you go outside, you'll see that it will be sunny. 15 minutes later, when it was time for us to leave the sky was completely clear. At the same school, one day I saw the teacher walk by, and a classmate said, here comes the teacher, typical teenage stuff. Here comes the teacher. These were things that happened to me without thinking about them. Ileje, out of nowhere, I said, you'll see, she's not coming. What do you mean? Didn't she just walk by?
A spontaneous reaction, like an intuition that just came out of you almost like a reflex, so to speak.
Exactly. 10 minutes later, they told us look, the teacher got an urgent call. She won't be able to teach the class. That's when something kind of reawakened in me, almost like a new awakening, making me think, what's happening to me? So I said, well, I'm going to put it into practice. I started talking EO to my sister, for example, and I would say to her, okay, ask a question about something you want to know. And at first I could tell her things like whether something was going to happen or not. And then I was able to start expanding a bit more to say what was going to happen. She even would ask me, is such and such situation going to happen, this or that? And well, I would tell her, and then it would actually happen, right? And for me, that became kind of a game of curiosity, to understand what was happening, but also to start investigating more clearly. I went to the evangelical church. I started looking for what it was to read the Bible. It was the first time that I picked up a Bible to start reading. I started to investigate, and at that time, something else was happening to me. I always mention this because I think it's very important. Since I didn't know about other methods, I didn't know how it worked. When someone wanted to know about a deceased relative, I would say, who do you want to communicate with? Give me the name. And I would concentrate and could tell the person, well, your relative, this, that, and the other. It was like a mix between what I could foresee and that connection I used to have with the spiritual world. And that's when I started, in a way, to develop myself and to search, of course, sometimes through beliefs. That's why today I am a very spiritual person, placing spirituality above religion. I believe in all religions. I accept religions, but I understand that many times they put us in a box. Because if you come as a teenager with what's happening to you and look for answers in an evangelical church, the first thing they're going to tell you is, look, this is the devil that is trapping you. It starts to, like, instead of giving you a solution, they end up creating a question or a fear or anxiety in you. You start thinking, well, if these are demons attacking me, how do I get rid of this and what should I do? And well,
Of course, they start playing with your fear and bringing you down. In the end, it basically becomes indoctrination, which ultimately restricts you. Yes, it's clear that spirituality and religion are parallel things. They're different because being spiritual is basically having a belief and a connection with something ethereal, something subtle, something that goes beyond the physical, whereas religion is about doctrines, philosophical doctrines that have a structure and their own dogmas. And because of that, there are both positive and negative aspects. But in general terms, what they're going to do is there's a part where they're going to restrict your freedom to have free will.
absolutely. So I feel that that often, especially for mediums, it can lead us to a kind of pigeonholing that doesn't allow us to expand, right? But at that time, it wasn't something I was reasoning out. Rather, in my search for answers, in my search to find what my path was, my purpose, I started to explore different beliefs, and I went to church. I went to the Jehovah's Witnesses. I went to evangelicals in Catholic Church. Later on, around the age of 19, that's when I went to a more African-based religion where, yes, there were people who were possessed by spirits, and there I was able to speak more directly with those spirits. And well, from there, my life started to take shape, sort of like a journey of self discovery, always accompanied, from the spirituality, from the mediumship that I practice, and that belief, and in the search for that answer. I always say that I made a full circle. I understand that everything starts within oneself, and you can explore and acquire things. And in the end, you realize that the answer is within yourself when you let go of these dogmas, when you let go of all of that. But I am always grateful for all the experiences I have lived because every place I visited, every religion or belief I encountered, every country I was in led me to open my mind more and more and to show me a broader perspective on spirituality. I always say this phrase that I think is fundamental. We create through what we believe. We are the creators as children of God, with God as our creator, without religion. And each person who has their own religion creates through what they believe. That's why everyone's beliefs work for them. There isn't a religion that says this is the true or the only one you chop by, but rather the truth of God is spread throughout the world. And each of us creates through what we believe.
Well, Gustavo, I understand that ultimately all this spiritual curiosity, this search for answers, may be starting from religion at some point began to grow in you, more so during your adolescence. And in this search, did you come across any organizations, institutions, or churches that addressed mediumship? And if so, what was your experience like? Did you meet other mediums from any kind of religion or doctrine?
Not so much in the church, not so much in the church. What the church did believe in was the arrival of the Holy Spirit, where people could sometimes be in some kind of trance, but it wasn't something that I understood. So I didn't pay much attention to it. But yes, in the Umbanda religion, for example, where one day I went to that place, and for the first time, so to speak, I was able to see a spirit incorporated in a person, to really see it spiritually. And it was something that shocked me, but it shocked me in a positive way. Why? Because for the first time, I could see something that I understood, or that made me think, well, this is what I was trying to understand. And those conversations with those beings, those conversations with those spirits that answered questions I had, or that I had carried with me throughout my life, they answered me. That was the most direct understanding I ever had. It was no longer something so philosophical like reading a book and trying to interpret the message in that book, but rather something more direct, like saying, your purpose is this is what's happening to you. Or for them to tell me, to see the same things in me that I saw, that they could talk about my life without me having told them anything. It was something I could do for others, but it had never happened to me. So that brought me a great sense of openness, of acceptance, and understanding of that belief.
And where did you have your Umbanda experience? I've had that experience too. Did you have it in Brazil or in Uruguay?
No, in Uruguay. My wife's aunt was the first person who, around 1960 or so, was the one who brought that belief here to Uruguay. One of the first, and she, well, dedicated her whole life to it. I didn't know her. One day we went to my wife's aunt's house, and that night they happened to be doing a ritual or something like that. And that's when I was able to experience it for the first time. Honestly, I even think that energetically it was very intense. It was something really shocking. And it was like a revelation for me. At that moment, I felt that that place was where you could open up to your experience, to what you felt, to what it was, where you could be better understood. I think it was in that place where I found the most acceptance and understanding, and not so much in other beliefs.
For people who don't know what Umbanda is, Umbanda is a religious syncretism that is very strong in Brazil. It has Afro roots, but it also mixes in elements related to Catholicism. And in this syncretism, what happens is that there is a lot of work with incorporation mediums. An incorporation medium is a medium who receives an entity, and that entity speaks through the medium. And it's really impressive because people's voices and attitudes change, and they can tell you very specific things. I don't know how it is in the centers in Uruguay, but for example, in Brazil, there are Umbanda centers that have 8 incorporation mediums working at the same time, attending to people and carrying out work with a strong focus on charity. It's really interesting, and I have found it very interesting to see that different perspective compared to how I practice mediumship, or how you do, Gustavo. Now, I'd like to know what you think, for example, about mediums who have very different ways of practicing mediumship, like the people from Umbanda or those from Kardecist Spiritism, who have a very different approach and practice mediumship in a way that's very different from ours.
Yes, I think there is a new era of mediumship. I think that the mediums who are appearing or reappearing today, we are experiencing mediumship in a way that is well removed from religion. My personal experience, and this is something very particular, I never like to generalize, is, for example, that I have gone to some Kardecist centers, spiritist centers, also in search of understanding, because I believe when someone thinks they already know, that they already know everything, I feel that at that point, well, their path has ended, right? I think one should always seek openness and understanding. And yet I found myself with very dogmatic people, people very boxed in by their beliefs, people who were also, well, very Christian. And I believe that spirits can have any kind of belief, right? What do I mean by this? Their perspective, for example, is very confined to Christianity. So I ask, what about Judaism? What about the spirit of a Muslim, the spirit of a Hindu, the spirit of people with other beliefs outside of that? I found that maybe the mediums who existed before were very attached to religion, to dogma, and to the belief in. I completely understand. For example, when Allan Kardec began his research and the spirits that came spoke about Christianity, spoke about the gospel according to Spiritism, and all those things we used to see before, I understand that the time period and the culture made it necessary, as we talked about earlier at the beginning, right? That everyone has to hold on to what they believe in, or they manifest themselves according to what they believe. And just imagine if those spirits, instead of saying they were Christians in 1800s France, had said they belonged to, I don't know, some other belief system. The teachings they shared would not have been accepted because
Of course, it probably would have spread much less, of course. And maybe the point there more than being tied to religion was perhaps that it served as a channel that through that lens they could reach more people and create an openness of mind, understanding that there is something more and that there is the ability to communicate with the other side. I think that was the main objective, and the best strategy was to integrate it into the religious currents, in this case more oriented toward Christianity and Catholicism, right?
absolutely, so that there would be acceptance through culture. And I think the same thing happens with Umbanda. Those spirits that arrive, they manifest themselves in a certain way so that they can be identified as belonging to this or that type of spirit. If they showed up speaking and saying, well, I am Gustavo Modernell, I used to work as a carpenter in Umbanda, they wouldn't accept that either. They would think it was a dark spirit wandering around that hadn't been able to move on. So, well, they needed to manifest themselves the way they do. I think that spirits, in their wisdom and understanding, have always manifested themselves in that way. Today, with a greater openness worldwide, I believe, to spiritual awareness and leaving behind a bit the era of religiosity, I feel that we mediums are open to allowing those spirits to communicate in a different way, in a broader and more secular manner, right? That is the way mediumship is being practiced today, and I think that is the biggest difference we can find.
Now I wouldn't take away any merit, to the people, to the mediums who practice those do doctrines or tendencies. And besides, every medium is a bit different, and each spiritist center is also different. Some are more open, others are much more dogmatic and closed. So, like, we can't generalize, but in general terms, I have all my respect for all mediums, whether they are spiritists or from Umbanda, as long as they do good, as long as they do it from the heart, and as long as they truly connect. It is always positive. That's how I see it. Gustavo, and you were telling us that spirits basically manifest themselves according to uh, what is ideal, let's say, in order to get their message across. And that's interesting. I'd like to know how it happens with you when you connect with an entity, yeah, with a spirit, let's say. Do they keep the same personality? Do they appear as they were, or have they changed after crossing over? Tell us a little about that.
Well, I work a lot with what I have called evocative mediumship, which goes beyond just connecting directly with the spirit that arrives or that the person has in mind at that moment, since we are all always accompanied by certain types of spirits, even family members. Because of that lack of knowledge I mentioned earlier, right? Where I didn't have contact with other mediums, where I didn't know how it was done, I learned how to evoke that spirit. So in my sessions, for example, if someone comes looking to connect with their son or their mother or their brother, in the session, we are going to contact that specific person directly. It's not that, well, the person comes to a medium session with me and we contact whoever happens to be there. I always try to evoke that specific family member. Well, I always allow a period of 48 hours because I feel that the spirit on the other side keeps on living, keeps doing things. So it's to give that time frame for them to be able to show up. Having made this parenthesis, which I thought was very important to clarify, whenever they come, at least in my experience, they have always maintained their personality. They've always been just as they were in life. Even if at some point there was some situation of anger with the family member who stayed behind, or there were things to heal or to repair, many times they showed up in exactly the same way. Something I really like to clarify for people is that when the medium, or at least this is my case, I don't know if it's the same for you, but when the medium senses that the person has a pain, has some problem, a deficiency, a health issue, or some disability or something, it's simply to show us what the cause of their death was or what happened during their life, but it doesn't mean that the spirit still has that health problem or that disability. Once they pass on, they feel whole, but their personality remains, and they are very attentive to us.
I would I would like to share with you a small experience I had with a girl uh, who passed away from. At first, it was said that she had died from a tumor, a young woman, and I was going to have a session with her mother and father. And that morning, that girl already appeared. I really like. I often go out for walks here along the promenade here in Montevideo, and while I was walking up, the spirit of that girl appeared to me and said, "What I want you to tell my parents is that I died because of a bacteria and not because of the tumor." The afternoon comes, the session starts. I begin to talk with her parents. I tell them about what I feel about.
I didn't know anything about her, right? I don't ask for any information or anything. I just, well, in evocative sessions, I do ask for the person's name so I can call upon that spirit. But as for how they died, what they did, what they liked, I prefer to provide that evidence myself so that the person can always be sure that it really is their loved one. And in this case, for example, in the contact with this girl, what I'm about to share is what caught my attention the most. I speak to her father, I tell him about the tumor, they confirm everything, and before the session ends, she says to me, "Don't forget to tell him about the bacteria." So I say, "But beyond the diagnosis the doctor gave, I'd like to tell you that she is telling me she died because of a bacteria." At that point, the parents burst into tears and say to me, "Yes, she had a bacteria, but they had never been told that this was the cause of death. It had always been believed that it was the her tumor." The session ends, days go by, and this same girl contacts me again and says, "I need to talk to my niece." And I say to her, "Well, look, if you want me to communicate with your niece, you have to make sure that she gets in touch with me." Because as a medium, I don't like to go and approach someone or invade someone's free will by saying, "I have a message for you," or "Your family member wants to give you a message," because I don't know how they're going to take it. The next day, incredibly, sometimes on my social media, I do live sessions to bring messages to people who might be needing answers and for various reasons can't access a session. So I always try to give messages, and the niece of this woman shows up as evidence of her presence. And I say to her, "Well, your aunt has a message for you, write to me privately." And I did a session for her. Time goes by, and this spirit appears to me again and says, "My mother's birthday is coming up soon. I want to give her a bouquet of white roses because I know she liked them." It just so happened that in the mediumship course I was teaching, you, the aunt of that girl, was taking the course with me. She joined the course without knowing who I was or that I had made contact, but by then, now knowing who she was, I asked her, "Is your niece's mother having a birthday soon?" She replied, "Yes, her birthday is in 20 days. I'll tell you why. She told me she wanted to give her mom a bouquet of flowers and that they were white roses." And the girl as well, right? She burst into tears, overwhelmed with emotion, and told me she loved white roses. It's incredible how she told you that, isn't it? What I'm getting at with this story is that they don't lose their personality, that they're always watching over us, and that when they have the ability to make a connection because I think it's also very important for the spirit to feel comfortable with the medium. It's not that they talk to just any medium, but I feel there has to be a certain quality or understanding between both parties. They are able to keep manifesting themselves, to keep bringing messages, and that love they felt for their family members or that personality they had, because this girl was a very sweet person, a loving person in every way you looked at her. And she kept that even after her passing, and her concern for her family also continued beyond her departure. This experience was something very, very beautiful for me, and well, I wanted to share it and take advantage of your question to say that without a doubt they are watching over us, they accompany us, and they keep their personality day by day.
I have the impression that without a doubt they maintain that bond of affection, of love, of connection. They know about us. I am absolutely sure of that. But uh, I have the impression that their personality, they manifest themselves with their personality, the personality they had within their family circle at that time. But the spirit doesn't necessarily in the spirit, the being, the essence that lived that experience incarnated in that human group doesn't necessarily have that same personality. Maybe not, but they present themselves as they were so that people recognize it's the same essence. Because of course, if they show up with a very different personality, then their loved ones here wouldn't recognize them. The same thing happens with age. A person who passed away at 80 years old will initially manifest as an 80-year-old man or woman, but in the afterlife, they are not 80 years old, nor do they look or live like an 80-year-old. But if they were to appear here, as they really are on the other side, which is in their prime at around 30 years old, you'd say, look, a person is manifesting who feels amazing and is 30 years old. No one would associate that with the grandmother who passed away at 95 after a terrible battle with cancer. So they present themselves in a way that allows them to be recognized, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the personality structure they truly have at their core. At least that's how I understand it. I don't know what you think about that.
We are complete beings. We are not just this life, rather, it's about knowing that we were created, that we reincarnate, and that we live through many experiences. We have had many parents, many children, many siblings. Um, we belong to a spiritual community because it's not as if we are alone and isolated in existence. Rather, there is a group of spirits who accompany us as our ancestors, and without a doubt, their roles will change as we continue to reincarnate. It's possible that someone who was my mother in this life could be my daughter in the next, and that's part of the person's evolutionary process. From that perspective, what I've come to understand and learn is that we are like an onion peel, right? When a person passes away, over time, it's as if they gradually shed that personality. That personality remains with the person, but as consciousness begins to awaken again, because I think this experience is like being asleep, right? When we depart, it's like gradually becoming aware again of who we are, why we came to Earth, and who we were with. I feel like something leaves as if that personality starts to open up somehow. And something very interesting that you mentioned about personality, there are cases of people who have reincarnated, and as a medium, you can contact that spirit, and even though they are already living another life, the spirit will come as the family member they once were. I'm not sure if I explained myself clearly.
Yes, 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 of course. Because they might be living another experience, but they can appear in a session as who they were, in quotes, for that person in their past life.
Exactly, exactly.
But notice that I even think that since in other planes there isn't linear time, so past, present, and future are all experienced in the same instant, which is very hard for us to understand because we're not shaped by this experience in a way that lets us grasp that. What for us is a past life, a future life, a past or future incarnation in other planes could be parallel incarnations or experiences. Do you see what I mean? I mean, you, in your essence, could be living other kinds of experiences. And why couldn't you be, for example, incarnated as this character named Gustavo, who is a medium and has this experience, but at the same time, even simultaneously, here now, somewhere else? Gone in China, it could be a little 4-year-old girl who is living a different experience. The same essence, your being, who you are, could be living two experiences, for example, on the same planet at the same time. It's really crazy, but those things can actually happen.
That's something that we see, for example, the Bantu tribes, they have that belief. They see the universe as like a chessboard and believe that you can be in each of those squares, having a different experience in each one. They even believe that at the same time, you could be yourself and your pet, and you wouldn't know it. What you were telling me caught my attention because it reminded me of that.
Interesting. Hey, uh, um, question just came to my mind. Uh, have you ever received help from the other side? Is there any kind of a being, or maybe I don't know, a deceased ancestor, someone who accompanies you, helps you? Have you had experiences like that where you say, no, this is clearly an intervention from the other side? They gave me a hand. They helped me with this. What do you think about that?
Always, always, always. For example, I've written a book that I'm about to publish, which was entirely dictated to me by a spiritual guide I have. I feel that this guide has been with me since my childhood, or has been there since I was a child, and has always been there, teaching me and also educating me in mediumship. Not only have I learned from what I've studied, experienced, and from my travels, but that guide has also been guiding me and showing me things I needed to learn, things I needed to analyze. After a mediumship session, the guide would say to me, well, did you notice that this happened, that such and such thing occurred, that the spirit did this? And I've learned a lot. But also, for example, I always say that I knew my mother was going to pass away 15 days before it happened. She died suddenly, and I feel like someone warned me, someone warned me or has been with me. I've always felt accompanied. I've never felt alone. In fact, well, I have this habit that whenever I need an answer before going to sleep, and I want to take this opportunity for those watching the video to also teach you that the moment when we're about to sleep is when we can achieve the greatest connection. And I take advantage of that to ask for the solution or the answer to something I need for always. And before I fall asleep, I make that request, and the next day I wake up with that answer. It could be my spirit traveling in the astral plane and bringing back the answer, but I also feel that without a doubt, my ancestors, my guides are with me and always bring me that inspiration or that answer. I have never felt alone.
There's an old saying, I don't know if it exists in Uruguay, but at least here we say it, that the grandparents used to say, sleep on it. I'll sleep on it. When I have doubts, I sleep on them. And you see, it actually makes sense because in that state between wakefulness and sleep, you connect very strongly, since at that point you're basically operating in alpha or delta states. And what happens there is that you still maintain your lucidity, but you're already experiencing a different kind of reality where your spirit, so to speak, is much more freed from the structure of matter. And that's why you can connect much more strongly there. In fact, it's a state similar to trance. When you're in that state, you see, when there's incorporation or trance incorporation, people are in that kind of state, and often they end up unconscious as if they're sleeping, right? And that's why it's so important. I always tell people it's so important to have the ability to maintain lucidity in dreams, because this experience is like a dream. And when we transcend this experience, we're going to start living another experience. And if we have done prior work to maintain lucidity in dream experiences, the processes after we leave this physical body will be much easier. We will maintain lucidity. That's why we need to look into this. Every single time we go to sleep, for me, or from my perspective, it's a small death.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, that's why so often when we sleep, we can encounter those loved ones who have already passed away, who have died, and we can see them and even have conversations with them, right? Like I mentioned today about my mom who was able to meet with her father and receive those messages. I always say that our spirit, when we sleep, we leave our body. It's just that we often don't remember because our brain isn't prepared to assimilate or understand what we see or experience on the other side. That's why sometimes we have situations where we dream things that seem nonsensical, that don't make any sense. Like I dreamed something that had nothing to do with anything else, and it seems like it's not clear at all. Actually, it's because our brain, with the knowledge and information it has, tries to translate what our spirit experienced during the night, but due to missing pieces, it puts together a puzzle with what it has, and that's why many times we can't understand a dream or figure out why it seems so nonsensical to us.
Of course. And sometimes it also happens that dreams, when there's no lucidity in the dream experience, your subconscious and imagination get mixed in as well. So it turns into a tangled experience, and your imagination can also be projected. And that usually creates a kind of chaotic and disorganized experience. But when people have lucidity in the experiences are not chaotic or disorganized. And this is a big difference. For example, when someone dreams of a deceased loved one and it's dream mediumship. First, the experiences are not very long, just so you know. They're actually quite brief, very clear, linear, very, very clear, very linear. No, there isn't this kind of chaotic, disordered experience. And you feel as if you were with the person 100%. You wake up with the sensation of having truly been with them. You notice details you had forgotten, like how they wrinkled their face or when they smiled, this or that would happen. Things you had forgotten rationally, but in that moment, it's as if you relive them. And also, there's a very specific characteristic. When they talk to you, they don't move their mouths, they don't articulate, they might gesture, but if you pay attention, they're not actually moving their mouths, yet you're still hearing them because it's all telepathic. People sometimes tell me, hey, I dream about my dad, but he doesn't talk to me. They are talking to you, but you're not hearing it because you're used to listening with your ears. And it's like if you had the openness to understand that they can also communicate telepathically, it would be a whole different story. If you have a lot of mental noise, you might be able to see them, but you won't understand who is speaking to you. And finally, what I wanted to share with everyone is that when we have very lucid experiences in a dream, we can see situations that haven't happened yet because we are in dimensional planes where time isn't linear. So we might see an event that hasn't manifested here yet, but that will eventually manifest. If you have, and if, when that event impacts you, and you are lucid and maintain that lucidity, when you wake up, you will remember it. And when it happens, you will understand that it was a premonition or a precognition. But it's possible that you have lucidity, but not that much lucidity. And you don't remember that information, but it was recorded in your subconscious. And when that event happens, it will come to you as a deja vu. I've already experienced this. I don't know why. You experience it in those dreamlike spaces, but it stayed in your subconscious and not in your conscious mind. That is the big difference between a premonition and a deja vu for me.
Absolutely. It's also important, as you rightly said, to set an intention. When we want to learn about spirituality or we want to find an answer to something we have, we need to ask our spirit that when it leaves our body, it goes to that place that we need in order to find an answer, to be able to learn something. And that's something I do a lot, and I have received that answer, just as you said, right? Like an intuition, like something that upon waking up, you realize that, oh, say, that thing you learned on the other side. That's important. I feel that people sleep without even knowing what's happening with their spirit, as if it just goes wherever it needs to go. I think it's much more useful when we at least get into the habit of asking. I'm someone who has never done astral travel. I don't, for example, I don't have the ability, or I haven't really tried to develop it either. But I do know that, for instance, I have spiritual experiences when they're important, like when I dreamed that my mother was going to pass away, or when things have happened that I needed to foresee. So that's when I've had those experiences. or it's happened to me that I'm half asleep, but when I'm just about to wake up, I feel like there's a spirit doing something. Something specific, for example, grabbing my arm while I'm sleeping, for instance, or someone last night, something very strange happened to me that when I was about to wake up, something did this to me. And my own hand pulled my hair. It sounds kind of strange what I'm saying, but I know that there's something, it's happened to me when I'm about to wake up and I become aware of the spirits that are around.
From what I understand, you've had experiences of incorporation, of identities that have acted through you. So I understand what we're talking about. Now, do you think, or have you had experiences like that, but ones that weren't voluntary? I mean, have you ever felt that there's some entity that wants to dominate or overpower you at some point?
I feel that no, because I try to work a lot on my self control. I do feel that there are certain energies that can influence me or that aren't positive or that try to, but whenever I've done this, it's always been intentional or because I wanted it to happen. I have felt energies or spirits that maybe had the intention of yeah, that kind of manifestation, but I've always been able to control it. The other day, it happened to me during a mediumship session with a father who had passed away and hadn't been able to move on. And at that moment, that spirit entered me and started speaking to his daughter during the session. In that case, maybe it was involuntary, but I also feel like it was anticipated because I initiated the session. It's not like I was doing something else and it just happened, but rather that Father manifested during the session. That has happened to me too, and they are very interesting experiences.
Of course. And when that happens, usually you're not thinking about anything, you just let it flow naturally. It's like there's no filter, it just comes straight through.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Hey, Gustavo, do you think there are limits or rules that a medium shouldn't cross, for example?
Yes, yes. For example, ethics, right? As a medium, I feel the importance of keeping secret what is discussed or what happens during a session. I think that's fundamental. And something I always teach people is that the Spirit will assess your honesty. The Spirit will also know how faithful you are when translating the message you're giving to their loved one. And I feel that your future sessions will also depend on that. Why? Because spirits communicate with each other. And if you were honest in what you said, if you did what the Spirit asked you to do and you didn't twist things too, change the situation, that Spirit will spread the word from the other side and will say, this medium says what needs to be said. I feel that the honesty in the process we are carrying out in delivering the message that must always be kept very clear. I tell people when I start the session, I'm not going to guess about your loved one. I'm going to tell you what your loved one has to say, and that will be the right thing. And I think that's very important, isn't it? Because many times I think people can end up in situations or places where I feel like this happens. If you're not sure, you shouldn't say it. And if you're doing this, you have to be 100% clear because I understand that, uh, uh, as the word itself says, the medium is only the link, but you have to respect the spirits. I always talk to my students and tell them it's very important that if you schedule a session for 2 in the afternoon, you are ready at 2 because that spirit will be there waiting to deliver the message. It's not like, oh, I don't feel like it, I won't do it, or I make up an excuse, or, oh, I start at 20 past 2 instead of at 2. I feel that, so, well, these are certain rules that one must follow, must uphold, and also in the way one behaves, like in daily life. People ask me, Gustavo, what's the best way to protect yourself? The best way to protect yourself is to act well as a person. Because the higher you vibrate as a person, with good thoughts, good intentions, and good wishes toward others and your surroundings, the higher the energy will be of those around you. But if you vibrate with bad intentions, with dishonesty, or you're always filling your head with things like politics, this and that, things that don't add anything positive, what will surround you will be the same as what you're vibrating. I feel that this is very important as a medium as well. And also to understand that this should be approached as a way, I see it this way, maybe I don't know if you'll agree, as a way of life. It's not simply that I'm a medium when I sit down and do a session and then do whatever I want with my life and live a mess, but rather that my words and my thoughts have to be in line with my actions. I'm not sure if that's what you were getting at with your question, but I feel that it's part of what we have to fulfill.
What you said reminded me that um, we shouldn't relativize things so much. It either is or it isn't. And actually, I had an interview with a medium named Mikel Lizarralde, who's from Spain, and he said exactly the same thing. He said that, hey, there are a lot of people doing something that he doesn't see as mediumship. For example, he said, they pick up a book and say, this, I see this, it's a book, but maybe it's not a book, maybe it's a ruler, maybe it's a notebook, or maybe it's a piece of wood. And it's like, and he said, if the spirit tells you it's a book, then it's a book, and it's not a piece of wood, it's not a notebook, it's not a board, it's a book. It's like,
Absolutely. Being able to maintain the purity of the message that they want to give and that they transmit, I think that's fundamental. Because I always say this too. It's not just about the person who comes to the session, it's about that spirit. I truly believe that if there's a session, it's because first the spirit wanted it and then the person wanted it. Because I understand that they decide when they want to come or when they want to communicate or when they need to deliver that message. If you, as a person, as a human being, have the need to receive a message from your loved one, I feel that it's reciprocal. It's not like I just decided I wanted that message and my loved one said, all right, I'll go. No, I feel that on the other side, there's also a need for communication. And something I always say about this as well, yeah, is that it's not about the medium. Many times, mediums are more concerned with how much evidence they can provide, with how many things they got right in what they said, rather than what really matters, which is being able to bring the message. I tell my students, if you had one piece of evidence and that alone was enough to show the family member that their loved one is still present, that's it. It's not about you, it's about the person who comes to the session, and that's something that often gets overlooked.
sometimes I feel like people kind of get lost there. It could be an issue of ego or insecurity, where what they're looking for is to give and give and give evidence, but that's kind of like playing a guessing game, and that's not what's important. I mean, a piece of evidence can be significant as an entry point, but what really matters is what's underneath, why they're there, why this meeting is happening, why this spirit is present, why this client is here, right? And they're not going to come from the beyond just to give out facts so that people say, wow, this medium is amazing. How can they know such specific things? If there isn't a story, if there isn't something truly meaningful beneath it all to heal, right? To heal, to close cycles. If it's not something a bit more profound, they're not just going to come to give out facts.
Absolutely. It's not just about the evidence. It's not just about the evidence of they like this or that. Very recently, this happened to me during a C live session on my social media as Iki, well, where a mother joined in and I connected with her and said, yeah, I always tell them, give me the name. And then I start to connect with the name of that family member. So they start putting in the names, and that's how I chose the mother. I tell her, your son, her son had passed away. Someone had taken his life. He had gone out to make a purchase. Something happened, an attempted robbery. And the son tells her, Mom, I have a friend who is a police officer, and I want you're going to meet him. Trust him because he's going to find the person who did this. The mother didn't even know she had a police friend. Days go by, and she meets this man who really is a police officer. She tells me what caught my attention was that I didn't even know they were such good friends. They knew each other from school with my son. They had a great relationship. And that man took the case on his shoulders. He got and started to investigate until he found the person, and today that person is serving his sentence. Right? And she tells me, I can't believe it, Gustavo, because I surrendered myself to what you told me. My son told me that, and I trusted in that, and I trusted the person and followed every step he told me to take. And so I feel that this is where the importance of the message lies, not in how much evidence we provide, but in the manifestation of that being, as you say, to resolve something, to bring a teaching, to offer a solution or an answer to something. And in this case, well, something such an important case, right? Like this situation.
Of course, those magical things sometimes happen in the sessions, don't they? Things that suddenly stop afterwards, it just clicks for you. And it's like, wow, how can such magical things happen, right? Gustavo, what is the most extraordinary case you've had in mediumship? If you can share it with us, could you briefly tell us about it?
Well, I've had several cases. I had a case involving an acquaintance who had moved into a house. I had already known him for some time. He had moved into a house, and I told him, "Hey, yo, yeah, hey, don't forget if you're going to a house, I firmly believe that if someone moves to a new place, they should at least do some kind of energy change, a spiritual cleansing, something to remove anything that might have been left behind from previous situations so that it doesn't become an obstacle for us." In his rush, he said, "Well, look, I don't have time. Let's leave it for later. I'm going to move in." So he ends up moving in with his girlfriend, and they start all living there. Not long after, he comes to me one day and says, "Look, things aren't going well with my girlfriend. Uh, mm, I don't know what happened, but I feel like she went through a big change." He starts telling me that she would wake up every day at 3 in the morning because she started hearing noises in the kitchen of the house. And she started saying, "I don't want to live here, Aki. I don't want to live here. There's something in this place. I can't stay here." And he also had sudden mood swings where he felt like he wasn't himself, right? So I decide to go and investigate. I tell him, "Okay, let's go to the house." I go to the house, and the first thing I notice is an archway in the living room. And I see an energy, a spirit. Sometimes I say energy because I don't know if it was a human spirit or some other kind of energy, you know? That's why I generalize. I see a spirit standing in that spot, and I say, "That's the presence. That's bothering you too." And he happened to work renting out video game consoles. And on that piece of furniture where I saw that, he kept all his consoles, and he said that all of them had burned out. For him, that must have been a catastrophe, incredibly. All of them broke, and he tells me, "Do you know that I even left this here?" And all of them broke. I said, "Well, what we need to do here is a spiritual cleansing." We coordinated the day and time. His girlfriend had already left the house, and I started to do a cleansing, which is a regular cleansing I perform with certain materials, requests, prayers, and such. And I go and cleanse the place. And well, I do everything around the place, and then we leave. I say we because we have to take all these materials to dispose of them and then come back. Perfect. He leaves with me. I understand that the spirit, with what I do, but with what I do, it's as if the spirit follows you. So the idea is that you can leave the place and the spirit can go on its way, right? Because I talk a lot about what has to do with obsessive spirits, spirits that become obsessed with a person, and that's why I say it follows them. It turns out that, well, apparently everything was finished. The cleansing of the place was done. I felt the place was lighter. I said to him, "Well, perfect, we're done." I took him back to his house, and that night at 3 in the morning, he called me and said, "Gustavo, I feel like something is scratching the wall in my room." He heard a noise, like something was scratching. I said, "Well, Dad, turn on the light and check, and I'll come get you." And he said, "No, no, I can't turn on the light because the switch is by the bedroom door, and where I hear the scratching, it's right there at the door." "All right," I told him, "I'm coming over to your house and try to get out however you can." I said, "You have to gather your courage to get out." I went to his house to get him, and he came running out into the night. All of this happened at 3 in the morning. At that point, I obviously realized that instead of having cleansed the place, it was like I had stirred up something that was in an even worse state. That night, I spoke to him, I looked at him, and I could already see that his situa, his face had changed, his features had changed. He said to me, "Can I stay at your place?" And I thought, if the spirit is influencing him so that he comes into my house, I said to myself, I can't risk that spirit possibly entering my home. I told him, "No, look, what we're going to do is I'll put you up in a hotel for the night. and tomorrow I have to come back because we have to solve this. Perfect. He stayed there that night. The next day, I called a spirit guide who I do psychophony, which means he speaks through me and gives instructions about things that need to be done at the place. And he told me that in that house, in the back where there was a place like an old shed, they had performed some kind of ritual. They had left things buried there and other things. And that was what had caused the place to become like a channel for energy manifestations at that site. In the end, I went and did the cleansing just as that guide instructed me, using different things, different elements. And he told me I had to stay there until 3 in the morning with the lights off to confirm that the spirit wouldn't manifest again. That was the way we would really know if the healing and cleansing of the place was complete. So I went and did it. Just imagine, right? My nervousness knowing that it had manifested so strongly. But I went, I did the cleansing, I did everything, and I stayed in the place until that hour. The lights were turned off before 3 so that I would stay in that archway where that energy used to manifest, and nothing showed up. And well, from then on, my friend was able to go on with his daily life. I have many more stories, but I think that was one of the ones that really shocked me because of the manifestation that happened, the whole situation we went through, and how he was able to see that something was scratching the wall. Well, there were a lot of things that for me were pretty shocking or important things that I experienced firsthand.
Yeah, that's intense. A very powerful experience, right? Strange. Gustavo, do you believe there's a heaven and a hell, like that more traditional concept of the afterlife? What do you think the afterlife is like based on your experience? What do you think it's like? Is everyone on the same plane? Are there different planes? Are there different afterlives? What is it like? What do you think it's like?
Well, first of all, I don't believe in hell. I don't believe in that kind of punishment, nor do I believe in a punishing God, a God who, if you don't show reverence or don't comply with his whims, will torture you for the rest of your life. I always say this,
A god. That would be a very egotistical god, wouldn't it?
Exactly, exactly. I have my little cat, whom I love, and if he does something wrong, I'm not going to punish him because I know he's not aware. Let's imagine that God, when we make mistakes, could also, a wise God would think the same. They're not aware. I'm not going to punish them. So I think hell is a mental state of the spirit. I believe that when the spirit transcends, when it leaves the body, its fears, its actions, that's what creates that hell. But I do believe that there are different vibrational planes. I do believe, based on what I have studied, what I have learned, and even what has been shown to me in sessions with people, family members, not being in the same place, on the same plane on the other side, yes, having met, but each one living a different experience. I think we vibrate differently. It's not the same for a person with a low vibration or with certain attitudes or actions they've taken in their life to be with other people who may have dedicated their lives to greater well-being or to a higher elevation of consciousness or personal evolution. I feel that there are different planes, different levels where we can meet, but I don't really believe in a hell like the one shown in the Bible.
Yeah, I think the same way. I think that, well, in my experience as a medium, I've come to understand that there are different planes. And sometimes when someone arrives who has passed on, many times they are reunited with several family members who have passed away before them. But then each one goes to their own space. And I always tell people it's like suddenly you get to take a trip to Europe, but your family is spread out, one in France, another in Germany, but you arrive in Spain. And okay, to welcome you at the airport, everyone will come to Spain, but then you'll spend a little time together. And after that, each one goes off to their own place, so to speak. Yes, that's how I understand it. Yes, interesting. Hey, and for you, what are the most common myths about mediumship that you would like to debunk?
Well, first of all, uh, believing that is we communicate with demons to begin with. I think that's the main myth that's been imposed. Or also the idea that we don't let our loved ones rest in peace and that we communicate with them. They are not in an eternal rest. I always say this, let's not talk about a heaven, because when we talk about heaven, we're talking about something imaginary, right? Like those angels. Let's talk about a new dimension, let's say a fourth dimension, where they are not. I always say that the snail and the ant see in one dimension, they see lines, they don't know about our existence. We see them, the ants, we see the snails, but they can't see us or know about us. The same thing happens with the spiritual plane. We are like those ants and snails many times, in the sense that maybe we can't see them, but they see us all the time, and they continue their lives and their actions, learning and evolving from another perspective. So I don't believe in that idea of eternal rest and that we are bothering them, because besides, the medium never forces your loved one to come, that never forces them. If they come, it's always voluntary. When you start a session, I imagine you'll agree with this. You're not forcing a family member to come. If they come, great. If they show up and give that information, they give it. And if not, if for some reason they don't give it, that's something you can't control. So many times that gets lost. And also, something I think is important is the belief that this is a gift, that only certain privileged people have the ability to communicate with spirits. And I believe this is a skill, that we are all spirits. Our natural state is spirituality. So, how could I, as a natural being, a spirit, Marasesi, not be able to connect with my own essence, which is spirituality? I believe that we can all learn to communicate. I always say that this is like learning to play the piano. Some will be Mozarts, others will play a little less, but we can all learn to play the piano. Mediumship is the same. It is a skill that we can all develop, Ishan, and it's a myth that it's a gift, reserved for a privileged few.
Perfect. Well, for me, there are certain on that point I disagree a little, because I'm not saying it's a gift or something for someone privileged, nor that it sets you apart from others. But I used to think a bit like you. But over the years, from so many experiences I've had, I finally feel that there are people who are born with it, and there are people whose abilities are different, and they're going to have skills that I don't. Not even, not even in my dreams could I have those. But and there are others who have a different kind of abilities. I s- I sometimes feel that if you come here and you're living an experience, maybe you had to come with that little window or that ability active, and others come, they bring it inactive. Like for example, there are people who are uh there's a name. Well, there are people, for example, who have an ability. I can't remember the technical name right now. Who can, for example, see smells, right? Uh, Synesthetes, I think. Synesthesia, I think it's called, where people can see smells or see taste, and they have a way of experiencing things that others who weren't born synesthetic will never have. Even if they try to be, they just won't be. And I think that's where people sometimes get a bit lost, because we all have a certain ability, of course, to connect spiritually, but only up to a point. What we do have is the capacity for psychic development, which is indeed part of being human, and sometimes people confuse the psychic with the mediumistic.
I think, I believe that, for example, just as you said, there are people who are born with an innate ability. We come into the world with it. And I think that's what happened to me as well. And that my environment also helped me, right? Growing up in that place, in that house, helped me to expand that connection. But also, of course, I've always seen it from the perspective that the number of people who have learned mediumship development with me have been able to use it. People who I can assure you, Esteban would come. They laugh because they tell me I didn't start from zero, I started from -10. Never in my life had I had a connection with anything. I thought I would never connect with anything. And after a certain amount of learning, techniques, and things that I have taught them to put into practice, everyone has been able to connect, everyone has been able to channel. That's why I believe in this idea of ability. It's like I'm not going to be Messi in football, but if I want to learn to play football, I can learn, and maybe I can, handle the ball a little bit. I feel that in that sense, but I want to go a little further. When I talk about a gift, I think there are people who sometimes use mediumship to make others believe that what they have is a unique ability that no one else will ever be able to achieve. And that's often where the sense of manipulation comes in, right? So that's what I'm referring to a bit more, that it's not a gift, that someone can make that decision. But I will tell you that there is something people don't take into account, and that is that it is a miracle. Because when you've lost a loved one and you feel like you'll never be able to see them again, and you know you'll never be able to hear from that loved one again, and then you meet a medium, and that medium is able to tell you that it's not over, and you get that chance to reconnect. I think in a way it's like a miracle, but people have made it so common that they often don't give the encounter with mediumship the value it truly deserves.
That's right. What would you say to someone, or what advice would you give to a person who is watching this video and is thinking, maybe I'd like to have an experience with a medium? What should that person pay attention to? In Because there is or a whole range of mediums out there, what do you think that person should look for in order to say, with this one, or with that one, or not with that one, but yes, with this one?
Well, I think the first thing is affinity. I think we all feel it through affinity, right? There's someone who can, for some reason, I look at someone and I just don't quite feel right about them, or I see this other person and I love their presence, their energy, and I feel comfortable. I think affinity is the first thing, but you should also always look for references. I think it's very important to really try to find out who the medium is, if there are recommendations, what those recommendations are, if there are recorded experiences of sessions that show, well, that this medium has demonstrated that they can channel or that they really can deliver messages. And the third thing, which for me is extremely important, is to go into a mediumship session without any expectations. I think that's very important as well, because sometimes people are looking for answers, like we talked about today, right? The medium is going to give the message that needs to be given, not what you want to hear. And there are people who sometimes go in with the expectation of finding answers that maybe the medium won't provide, not because the medium is good or bad, but because the spirit doesn't transmit it or doesn't want to give it. So, knowing if you resonate with that medium, seeing them and liking them, and knowing what references that medium has is also important. And of course, going in without expectations. And I also think that when we go to a mediumship session or decide to go, the important thing is to go with an open mind, not to go just to test them, not to go just to test not because of the medium, but for your loved one who is also taking the time to come, to be present, to bring you a message. And so that we can make the most of that moment, right? I think that's fundamental as well.
Gustavo, I want to thank you and all of our audience for joining us for this new episode of Fuera de la Matrix en lo Invisible. And as I always say, give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave your comments, because that way the YouTube algorithm will help us reach many more people with this content, with this very interesting interview. Gustavo, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you very much. It has been a pleasure for me. And well, thanks also to the audience.
Well, and to all of you, I send a big hug in advance and invite you to join us next Wednesday for a new episode of Fuera de la Matrix and Lo Invisible.